Building a new church can be one of the most stressful, yet the most rewarding things that a pastor does in his tenure. We understand that whether it's a renovation project or a brand new build, there are many, many stress points. There are many things that can cost more than expected, that can have longer time frames than expected. So in all of this, before you build, we want to help you think about a lot of different areas that probably need to have decisions made on before you ever really get started. Some of the greatest construction advice ever given was given by Jesus himself. Luke chapter 14, verse 28. If you're going to sit down and think about building a tower, Jesus said, make sure while you're intending to build that you count the cost to see if you have sufficient to finish it. When you think about that, let's talk about the intending stage. You intend on doing this. You want to do this. You plan on doing this. You may have even told the church, we're going to build. But before you swing the first hammer, before you turn the first spade of dirt over, Jesus' advice is sit down and create a budget. Make sure you can finish what you've started. The preparation stage is really about determining the completion stage. Nobody ever wants to get started on something and not be able to finish it. In fact, Jesus even said, if you start building and you can't finish it, it says the neighbors are going to mock you. We don't want that. We don't want to lose credibility in the community. You don't want to lose credibility within the church. So before you build, it's important to stop, prepare, and count the cost. Preparing to build should not be done all by yourself. There are many people in the industry, even people associated with the Church Loan Fund through construction services, or also there's companies, like Arc3 Studios in Houston that are there to help churches prepare for the project. Let's talk about why you want to build. I ask this question to pastors who call us for loans. I said, well, why do you want to build? What's your real motivation behind it? I'm always looking for that to make sure that somebody is not building just because other people are building. It's not about just getting a prettier building, but that you're building because you need to build. You got to make sure it's more about a need than a want. Because anytime you enter into a building project, when it's just based on want, there always seems to be more problems. But when it's based on need, and the need is because the kingdom is growing in your community, then God is going to be behind it even more. Why do you need the building? What needs are you attempting to meet? Are you sure that a renovation or a reconfiguration won't do the job? We always want to make sure that we've exhausted all other options and all other resources before we build, because building is a very stressful time period. We don't want to sugarcoat this. Okay. I always tell pastors before they start a construction project, take your family on a vacation, enjoy one last week, because the next 12 months, God forbid 18 months, could be some of the most stressful time periods of your life. And so you've got to make sure you're prepared. The most common reasons to build that I hear, of course, is seating capacity limitations. You're there on Sunday, there's not a seat left in the house. I'm afraid to tell you, you've waited too long to build. We understand that most churches need to start planning out building when they hit about 75 to 80% of their capacity. You need to look at how you're going to expand, because if you don't, you will actually hinder the growth of the church. You never want to get to a point to where you can't grow beyond a certain limit with no other options available. We'll talk about what some of those options can be in just a moment. There are some things that you can do before you build that can help expand seating capacity. One of those, if your church currently has pews, I strongly encourage you to look at replacing those with chairs. Studies have shown that your seating capacity can increase up to 20%, sometimes 25% with the use of chairs instead of pews. You can change the width of aisleways. You can change the configurations. I've seen many, many different configurations. The church that I pastored, we switched from pews to chairs and immediately got almost 30 more chairs in the building. We configured it so that there were 4 to 5 chairs against the wall with 2 main aisles with a large center section. Those could easily be moved around. If there was a wedding or something, we needed a large center aisle, we could do that. It makes it more multifunctional. Plus, it expanded our seating capacity. One of the other things you can do is take a good look at your platform. Do you need all of that space? I've been in some churches where the platform itself takes up almost 30% of the entire room itself. At the church I pastored, we reduced the size of our platform by 8 feet. We still had plenty of room for the musicians, the singers, everything. None of that changed whatsoever. We cut back 8 feet, and that's one of the things that allowed us to get 30 more chairs in the sanctuary there. And so make sure before you do a full out build, make sure you've exhausted all resources in the configuration of your current assembly, the pulpit size or the platform size, also maybe even turning it. I know of one church that was in a, more of a narrow type facility. They actually turned theirs to face the other way, and they actually got more chairs in the congregation. People were actually able to sit closer. Little things like that can go a long way in buying you time as you prepare for another build in the future. Other issues that we hear a lot about is classroom size limitations. If you have a large children's ministry, large youth ministry, the same thing applies there. If there's too many kids in a room, they'll stop coming. Too many youth in a room, they'll stop coming because it's too cramped. You want to make sure that you have adequate classroom facilities. Also, parking lot limitations. We hear this a lot. Churches that they may have room in the building, but outside is absolutely packed full and having major parking lot issues. So the need to buy more property somewhere that would give them more parking space is essential. The fourth thing, most common thing that we hear about, of course, is the age of the facility itself. Some churches, they go beyond their lifespan even in that church facility where it's at. So retrofitting becomes cost prohibitive. If it costs too much to replace the air conditioner system, the roof system, other major things, or maybe the building has been added on to multiple times and it's just not feasible to add on anymore, then that is definitely reason to consider a brand new build out. Moving into now counting the cost. Counting all the cost. I've made a list here and I've asked a couple other folks to chime in from the industry to help give you some things to think about that we have seen pastors forget about as they're looking at their construction project. The old rule of thumb was you can build for $100 a square foot. That is long gone. That is not anymore. There are so many other costs that are built into construction now that have changed that concept or that idea that $100 a square foot will get you the building you need. Please do not think that anymore. It's much more than that. In most places, it's doubled that. When we look at a successful budget, there are 4 major components that you want to look at. The first is the soft cost. Soft costs are your architect, your engineering, your permitting, your contractor's fees, the money that's going out and is going to pay for things that honestly you never really see. You don't go out and you buy an architect and you go to your land and you see your architect there. That's not how that works. When you buy the architect's experiences, he's going to provide you with a set of plans that is going to be appropriate for your local community, that meets the building codes and it meets all of these essential items that you need to have in place. We've seen some churches that, maybe they're in a county area to where they don't have a lot of building codes. There are still state requirements. You're still going to have to think about water retention and runoff. You're going to have to think about, if you're in a church that has a septic system, where's your wastewater going? Is there I've seen one situation where downhill from the church was a lake. And so there was some regulations on how their septic system would even work. The pastor didn't have a clue about all of that until he involved professional people who could help make him aware of the unknown factors that potentially could cost a lot of money and really hurt the budget going forward. So your soft costs, again, are extremely important. The second area that we see overlooked a lot of times is what we refer to as FFE, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. What's it going to cost to put seats in the building? What's it going to cost to put the desks in the building? What's it going to cost for your lighting? If you have special lighting, if you have computer systems, your sound system. There are ways now that churches are implementing sound and audio that go so far beyond anything we ever considered even 10 years ago. Obviously now with the need for live streaming, we want to step up our audio game. That's a deal where you can spend a lot of money just upgrading in those areas. without it ever really considered in your initial budget. So before you do this, when you talk about considering all the costs, think about all of those aspects that are things that are going to have to go into the church to make the church look like you want it to look, sound like you want it to sound, and feel how you want it to feel. The third thing that gets overlooked a lot is the contingency fund. We strongly recommend right now, especially in this market environment, to plan for a 20% contingency plan. So whatever the cost is to build out everything, you need to have an extra 20% on hand. We've seen several churches that had, a 10% contingency plan, a 15%, and still go over budget and need more money as they borrowed, to finish things out. It's very important that you understand that your contingency fund is what's going to save you. It is a safety net. And again, I know we want to trust the Lord that whatever this budget is, that's what it's going to come in at. But please understand, there are times where you need to make sure you have built the safety net into the system so that you're not relying on having to borrow more money or having to go back to your congregation to ask for another special offering, but you've got it built in to cover those costs. Now, as you progress through construction, that amount can come down. That's something where you don't always have to have that initial 20% set aside. If you're halfway through the project, of course, that number can be reduced. But starting out, you want to start with 20%. Finally, the fourth thing, which is the main thing, and that's the hard cost. The cost of metal, the cost of bricks, the cost of wood, the cost of the pipes. This past year, I had a pastor call me and he was buying some PVC pipe for a renovation project they were doing. A few weeks before that, he had priced the pipe and it was in the $8 to $9 per pipe range. When he called me, it was about a month and a half, maybe, I think later, prices had skyrocketed. That same piece of PVC pipe was $92. He called me crying. I don't blame him. That's one of those deals that he could not forecast that. They had to put their construction project on hold while the prices came back down so they could finish out their project. That's an unforeseen thing. And that's what we're facing right now, is there's an unforeseen, things that are coming that there's no way we could have planned for those things. But yet when you're looking at hard cost, we strongly recommend, and you'll hear more of this, to get firm bids. There was a time over the past year that suppliers, they were given as little as 3-day confirmations on prices. It was making it very impossible to plan and build out. We never thought those days would come, but they came. So now going forward, we always want to make sure we're prepared and get the most secured bids that we can get on the hard costs that come into your project. Let's talk now about square footage. There are questions that we get asked a lot, such as, I need a place that'll seat 300 people. How big do I need to build? And you're looking at the seating capacity as the determining factor of the whole project. That is a good place to start, but please understand that's not all you need to consider. But we wanted to give you some numbers based on this. Typically when you look at meeting places, there are some standard numbers that are used across the industry, and you'll see anything from 7 square feet to 15 square feet per person that are going to be in a building. If you have a facility that's going to be a standing room only type facility, which we obviously stand in our church services, but we're not standing room only. You can see facilities that are built at 7 square feet per person that's going to be in the building, again, if they're standing. But if they're sitting, if it's a loose knit chairs and it's not extremely organized, maybe more like a dinner setting kind of place where there's square tables here and round tables there, that type of setting, you can expand up to 15 square feet per person because you're going to need a little more room to account for the tables and some of the chairs. But in a church setting, especially when you're looking at building out a sanctuary, around 10 square feet per person is kind of a good target to be in, because there are times you're going to stand. There's also times you're going to sit. Now, this 10 square feet would not count the platform. So if you're going to factor in the platform space, one of the things that I've seen done before is they'll add maybe 2 to 3 square feet per person. So if you're looking at, 300 in attendance or 300 seat capacity seating, maybe you want to go, instead of 3,000 square feet, maybe you want to go 3,500 square feet or 4,000 square feet to give you plenty of room for platform and for the altar area. Always want to make sure you're adding in that altar area as you look at how you're going to measure out your spacing. For admin space, you're looking at adding offices. These are not classrooms. These are just offices. You might think about your small meeting rooms, your, the hallways, some of those kind of things. You want to look at about 200 square feet per office in there. For your foyer, it's going to be about 25% of your sanctuary. Now, one of the things that we've seen churches doing that's really interesting is they're almost matching the size of their foyer to their seating in the main sanctuary, because they're using their foyers as multi-purpose facilities. I've seen weddings hosted in foyers. I've seen receptions hosted in foyers. Those foyers are doubling now almost as the fellowship hall. So something to think about as you're looking at building out. The size of your classrooms depend on the age of the child that's in there. Of course, a nursery, because you may have mothers in there also. More than just the child, the adults that care for them need to be a little bit larger. As you're looking at all this, we're putting together a proposal, a plan where a pastor can go on to our website, put in the seating capacity, and it gives several options for how much square feet you could need. That's also going to filter down and look at how much money is it going to cost, because we're going to help you add in those soft costs and create percentages that help look at, how much is it going to cost to have the architect, the engineering, and all those things, and give you one central landing point to give you a good calculator for all those items. Let's move now and talk about budget busters. These are things that we've seen really hurt the budgets that pastors have put together. And we'll give you some warnings on some of these things. The first one, of course, is just wanting too much. Just not being able to afford everything you want, but trying to force it. You need to make sure that you're building what you need, not just everything that you want. The second thing is overlooking the cost of design, overlooking the cost of engineering and architect, the permitting, the testing. You may have to have soil testing. You may have to have, again, the storm water retention, things like that really hadn't come into play, but could become very expensive items. Also, working on an assumed budget. The idea that says, well, I built a house 20 years ago, so I know how much stuff costs, and you just take guesses at it. Please don't do that. Sit down again and count the actual cost. Don't work off of assumptions. One of the biggest things that we see affect a budget of a church are what's referred to as change orders. In other words, you've started with your plan, but somewhere along the way, you make changes. Sometimes those changes can result in thousands and thousands of dollars of overruns. When you look at that, there may be some changes that you actually have to present your plans back to your city governing office, your building authority. You may have to present it back to them, and they may come back with other changes that are associated with it that you didn't see coming. So making sure before you build, get everything as set as you can get it so you don't have to worry about the change orders coming down. A couple of the things that can be an issue, especially for renovation projects. Make sure you check with your city ordinances and your city building codes to make sure that there's some of them that say if you spend a certain dollar amount, then you have to put in a sprinkler system. Maybe your facility has been grandfathered in and it doesn't have a sprinkler, the fire sprinkler system requirements. But if you spend a certain dollar amount renovating that building, that grandfather clause could be removed, and you would actually have to go in and spend thousands of dollars installing and retrofitting a sprinkler system. We've seen that happen for churches before, and it can be very, very troublesome. One of the other things that we've seen affect a budget is the parking lot. There are now city codes. Probably the most restrictive one I've seen yet to date was it was a city that was requiring one parking place for every person in the building. Typically we see things like one parking place for every 4 people in the building or for every 3 people in the building. But the one where it was one for one, that can put your budget way out of whack because you may not have enough room for a parking lot that big. So making sure that you understand the building codes associated with your parking lot requirements before you go into building. I'm going to end with a couple danger zones, or what I call frustration creation zones. These are things that can cause a lot of frustration, but we want to guard against that. Garrett Delano from Arc 3 Studio, I asked him, what do you see as the pastor's biggest frustrations? And one of the things that he mentioned was unrealistic timelines. It takes time to build. If you look at building and maybe you have all the money up front, but you haven't started the planning and everything, it can easily take 18 months to go through the entire process. Some cities can take a long time to approve your plans. This is something where you can't say, okay, we're going to build and we're going to be done in 6 months. Please don't set that expectation. Making sure you're guarding and setting proper expectations for how the timeline is going to go through. Another thing that we see pastors struggle with a lot is trying to do it all on their own. You are called to pastor. And if you are not a general contractor by trade, leading a construction project can be very, very stressful. And we encourage you to hire a general contractor, hire somebody that you can hold accountable. We know there's a lot of churches that try to use people in their own congregations to do these kind of things. And to some regards, it's good because it can save the church a lot of money, but it can also be very bad because it can be something where you may want to hold somebody accountable, but because of a pastor-saint relationship, it may be a struggle. This is why we encourage you, hire somebody that you can hold accountable to staying on budget and staying on task. Jesus' advice again was to sit down and count the cost to make sure you can finish. And my advice to you beyond that is to sit down with great counsel. Surround yourself with people who can help you. Again, we have folks that we can refer you to, and there's others around our United Pentecostal Church organization who have the experience that can help guide you through this process to make sure that once you start the project, you have a great course lined out to finish it, so that as the kingdom grows in your city, God can give great harvest without all the stress and trouble.